Greetings, programmers, and welcome to our 7th episode of making our Frogger competition. Busted Thumbs here, back again with Fluffy Wishes.
Hello!
And we are ready to work on our cars. Are you ready to work on your car?
I don't have a car.
That's right, you're not old enough to drive. Besides, the cars nowadays are so complicated, it's very hard to work on them. But not in Scratch, because that's what we're doing here. We are going to have a bunch of cards coming across the screen, and the person or the sprite that's going to figure out when those cars get made is actually going to be the frog sprite. He's going to determine when it's time for a car to come onto the screen or not. Once that happens, I think the cars themselves are going to actually keep track of where they need to go. But we're going to need to know a few things. One of the things we need to know is how fast cars are going to travel in each lane. And we need to know how much delay to put between when the cars show up. Once we do that, we need to know at what tick each of the cars showed up in. Because basically we have to figure that out to figure out how many ticks to go before we show up another one. To do that, we're going to have to use some lists. So for all sprites, we're going to create a list of the velocities. And the reason we're going to use a list is because we want to show a different velocity for each of the lanes. Okay, so a list gives us a good way of having 4 different things inside of it. Okay, so the velocity to me is pixels per tick. Pixels per tick. So let's go ahead and make car velocity, and you'll see that that's an empty list. We're going to set these ones that are pretty static up inside of initialized variables, and I'll just make a block that is for initializing. And another one for lists. Now this just might make it a little easier to see what's going on. So this guy should really go down here. And we should make sure that we call that and then call that. Okay. So when we initialize the list, we'll start with velocity. We don't necessarily need to see velocity on our screen. So let's go ahead and clear it out so we don't have to watch it. But the first thing we need to do is to clear that list. There's somewhere in here, remove all. Delete. Delete all of car velocity. And then we're just going to add in 4 velocities. And I don't even know what to put here. Let's just see what one does. We're going to need 4 of them. The top one's going to be the truck, so maybe it's a little slower, so actually maybe we'll do like 0.5. This one's 1, and this one's 2, and this one's 1 again. I have no idea. We'll adjust these as we go on. We'll see exactly what they do. Alright, so we need the car velocity, and then we need the car delay. So let's make another list. And the delay is the number of ticks in between cars showing up. Said OK. And again, we don't need to see that. We're going to need to remove all of car delay and then add 4 items. Well, we don't want the truck to show up too often, and just to make it apparent, if I put 30 in there and I say 5 times 30, well, that's how often? If it's 5 times 30 ticks.
5 times 30 is 150.
Sure, but how many seconds is that? If 30 seconds...
5 seconds.
That's right, it's 5 seconds. That's why I put it in there, because when we read it that way, it shows up as 5 seconds. So we'll make the next one a little shorter than that. We'll also make this one about the same, and we'll make this one say 4. Now, it could be, we could have them right on top of each other if we wanted to, and I have no idea how this is going to show up. But once we see it all coming in, I think it'll make some sense. Okay, so we have the car velocity and the car delay, and then one other thing we needed to keep track of was the last time we saw a car in that lane. So, what we need there is last car tick or something like that. And again, we don't want to see that. We want to delete everything. And then we want to add 4 of these. In each case, we're going to say 0. Because that's the tick we last saw. And you know what? I'm even going to make, well, yeah, we'll go with that. We can change the behavior later. So we have those lists. Now let's start actually making a car. So the frog, he's got all this tick stuff going on, handling his tick. One of the things he ought to do is check for new cars. Check for new cars. And that's something he'll do after he figures that stuff out. So the check for new cars, that's going to be a bit of stuff that we have to define down here. Let's just go ahead and take some space up for it. I'll just move that down, get those out of the way, and give us some space. What he's going to need to do is he's going to need to look at the last time he saw a car and then go ahead and create a car if he needs one. So one of the first things I think we'll do to make this easier is just if it's actually equal to 0, we're going to just have to deal with creating a car right away so that each of the lanes has a car in it to begin with. That's just going to help us to debug it. But in order to do that, we're going to actually need a new variable inside the frog that I use often, which I'm just going to call index. And index is going to be where I'm at inside of the list. So the first thing I'm going to do after hiding index is to set the index to 0, and then I'm going to repeat 4 times something. I'm going to repeat, I'm not going to say 4 times, I'm going to repeat the length of the list. The length of car velocity, sure, why not? Because that should tell us how many lanes there are. Alright, so the first thing we're going to have to do is actually change index by 1, and that'll make sure that we're looking at the first lane inside the car. And I'm going to put a little if statement in here that says if the item at last car tick, item, and it's going to be index, item index of last car tick is equal to 0, then we're going to go ahead and make that car. Now, when we tell a car to create, what we're actually going to have to do is make a clone of the car. In order to make the clone of that car, we need to pass along some information like which lane you're in, right? And when we do that, there's no way to actually say when you create a clone to pass it any information, right? So if I put this guy inside of here, create clone of car, he has no information to know. So what we actually have to do is create a variable that's global, that everything can see, in order to know which one to make. So for every sprite, I'm actually going to have to create this car clone lane. And that's going to be the clone that we're going to make a copy of. The other thing that's tricky about making clones is that it happens right away. It's just like a broadcast. It sends out the thing that says, go make a clone, and then it just stops. I mean, it just keeps going. It doesn't wait for that clone to actually be done. And since we may be making more than one clone at a time, we actually want to wait until that clone is done. So I have to make another variable that we track across both of these called creating car clone. Okay? And what I'm going to need to do, first of all, is to say that we are creating a car clone. we want to make sure that that's false to begin with. So let's go ahead and make sure we set creating car clone to false. And we'll go ahead, because we're setting everything else, we're going to set car clone lane to -1. Okay, so back in here we are. We're about to create a car clone. We need to tell it which lane to be in. And the lanes, I like to count from 0, even though Scratch likes to count from 1. So I'm actually going to take index, which is what we're working with, and subtract 1. And we're not working with index. We want the car clone lane to be index -1. And then we're going to create a clone of car. And then we're going to simply wait. And we're going to wait until creating car clone is true again. Create, okay, so that would be in data. We need to take the creating car clone equal to true. Now do you see what we're doing in there? Oh, equal to false. We're making sure that when we create that clone, we're doing by ourselves. If they made a create clone and wait, that'd be great, but they didn't. So we're kind of making the create clone and then doing our own wait afterwards. Okay. All right, I think that's all we need to do. This is going to create a clone of every car for every lane, and now it's up to the cars to do its job. So, inside here, we're going to need a when I start as a clone. And pretty soon we're going to be dealing with this tick as well, because we're going to have to actually move these cars. When I start as a clone, we do need some variables on our cars now. For this sprite, it needs to know which lane it is. It's going to need to know that. And certainly, we had that all set up so that we can set the lane number to the car clone lane, just like that. It's going to need it to know its own velocity. Okay, so let's go ahead and, because we know the lane number, we can know the velocity too. The velocity is going to equal to the item at car velocity. And remember, Scratch likes to count from 1 and I like to count from 0, so we're going to have to add 1 to the lane number. Because my lane numbers are going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. And Scratch's list is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. It should know at this point, it should probably know the tick when it came in. So that's a variable we're going to need. Entry tick and entry tick. We can set entry tick to the current tick. No problem. And I think that's enough for it to know where it should be. It does, oh, there's one thing it does need to keep track of, and that's its size, its width. And we already had that one down here. And we were going to pick the width based on the car that goes in each lane. So let's make a little note to ourselves. Add a comment. Lane 1, lane 0 actually, is going to be which color car? What do you think? We have red, blue, and orange. It doesn't matter. You can just pick one.
Red.
You like red? I'm going to save the truck for last.
Okay.
Lane 1.
Blue.
Blue or orange?
Blue.
Blue. Lane 3. We'll call it orange.
No, you just skip.
I skipped one.
Yeah.
Can't do that. And lane 3, that's going to be our truck. Okay. This is just a note so that I remember what it is we're doing. So we're going to need to set the width here as well. And the width is going to depend on which lane it's in. So I think the best thing to do here is to make a list for us. Just for us, which is car widths. Now let's go ahead and set what those car widths are. So there is a event that says to initialize variables, and that's where we can do that little work. You know what, this is kind of small. Let me make sure that's bigger for you. When I receive initialized variables, let's go ahead and clear that list. Delete everything from car widths. And then we're going to add 3 things. So the first one will be red. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If our first one is red, the red seems to be a width of 200. Okay. 200. And then the next one is blue. And blue is also 200. And the orange one seems to be 192. And the truck is the much bigger one. It comes in at 317. Alright, so now this is pretty easy. When we start as a clone, we just do exactly what we did for the others. And we set that to the item of car widths. Again, we have to count by once. We're going to do lane number plus 1. Okay, so this should be a hidden sprite. It's not in the right position. Well, the best thing for us to do is to create something which is position car. We're going to position the car on the screen, and then we're going to say he can show himself. Alright. So positioning the car on the screen is X and Y. X is left to right, Y is up and down. So what is X based on?
X is based on the width.
Yeah, the width may come into play, as well as the tick, because it's moving left to right, so it's going to depend on the tick and where it entered. And the Y is based on?
The lane number.
That's right. Right, and thus the row that it's in. Okay, so one thing we probably need to do is to actually, one last thing that we need to do is to set the size to reflect the size of the rows. And it's just going to be just like our frog.
Hey,
We're gonna
Dad.
just set it.
You just said entry tick to tick, and then sent entry tick to item lane number plus 1 of car width.
Oh yes, so that's a good catch. This should be width.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're here, helping me out on this. So what we're going to need to do, one, we do need to set the size, so let's make sure we do that. Set size to, and the size should be relative to the column size, or the row height, just like we do with the frog and the lily pad, and then we show them up on the screen. So let's try and get this fairly quickly if we can. We're going to set the Y and the X, the Y, and I'm going to do something somewhat simple right now because we're running out of time, and I'm just going to set the Y for now, and then we'll get back to the positioning in a little bit later. Oh, and the last thing, just so I don't forget, let's go ahead and say when we're all done making this clone that creating car clone, that should be false. Okay, so the Y needs to be pretty simple. We're going to start at the top of the screen and start subtracting. At the top of the screen is 180. We need to subtract off our top margin. And our top margin is in data. then we need to subtract off this bar, the top one, and the lanes in between. So that's going to be a multiplication of the row height times the number of rows for log row count, plus 2. Okay, so we've gotten rid of all of those. Then we also need to put it in the right lane, and we want this lane to be at the bottom. So this is lane 0, and this is 1, 2, and 3. And since that means that we need to actually take the number of lanes and subtract out which one we're at, because we need to flip them. Because if we, well, I'll leave it for now, and I'll come back to it in the next one. What I'll just do is I'll say that we need to add to this. Let's see if this makes sense once I do it. We also need to add to this our particular row. So lane number. I'm just going to do it right. Car row count minus the lane number, and actually it's minus the lane number minus 1. And why did I do that?
Because you added 1 to the
car row count should be 4. If I'm in the top lane, I want that to be the lane number is 0. So I'm going to, oh, this should be plus. I'm going to add these two together. So there are 4 rows. If I'm in the top row, then my lane number ought to be 3. So I take 4 minus 3 plus 1. 4 minus 4 is 0. That's going to give me the number of rows down I need to go, which is 0. And then it will do the same. It'll just start counting down for each additional row. The only thing then I need to do on top of this, I need to subtract out one more thing, which is half of the row height. So really I need all of this that I've done just inside all of that, and I need to add half more to it, because that puts us in the middle. And I will not be surprised if I got this wrong. We're running out of time here, but let's just see what happens. It may be nothing and I just need to fix it in the next episode, but let's see what happens. Stop, let's go ahead and click play, and there we have it. And it did work. It didn't set its costume correctly, but look at that. We've got 4 cars. They're right in the middle in every lane. So this big long math thing that I had to think about over and over again, it does look correct. We'll get them to be positioned left to right a little bit more in the end, but I did promise, even last episode I promised we'd have cars. We have cars. They're showing up as trucks, but we have cars.
Yay!
Hey, we have something. All right, I hope that was good. I hope it made sense. I was rambling as I did the math a little bit, but I think if you look at it and try and understand which each of these things are doing to try and work with that row height, that you can make sense of it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next time. We'll do a little bit more with our cars. Okay, see ya. Bye-bye.
Bye!